years, and the very I think it was the fifth game of the season. The next year, Steph Curry breaks his hand. And
social media, we saw it on television. You see all that emotion pour out from Steve Kerr here in a, really a heated battle of the NBA playoffs against the Mavericks. And, his focus really needs to be on basketball, but here he goes, takes a moment and speaks out against.
So Steve Kerr lost his dad to gun violence overseas.
Hey, I'm Jeff Skversky. On this episode of Inside The Huddle, presented by Sportskeeda, I catch up with San Francisco sportscaster Jason Dumas from Kron 4. We talk about everything San Francisco, from the Golden State Warriors and Steph Curry. Do they have another magical run in them next season? Can they run it back? We'll also talk about Steph's legacy and inside the team the last few years. Also, Steve Kerr, we will get into his background as well. And we will also talk about the 49ers, Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance, and the quarterback situation there, where Jimmy Garoppolo could land. We will also hit on the Giants and Gabe Kapler in this episode of Inside the Huddle, presented by Sportskeeda. Jason, thanks for joining me today. Greatly appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thanks for having me, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
So you were a part and with the Golden State Warriors on that championship run yet again. What has been the last, 5-7 years been like watching this team up close and seeing what they've been able to do? Has just been remarkable.
Well, this past championship was really special. And even Draymond, Klay, and Steph, they've all but said that this one meant the most to them. And I kind of have a unique vantage point for this one because my first year covering the Warriors was the 2019 season. So that was the last season of Kevin Durant. And they went to the finals. They lose to the Toronto Raptors in the finals in 6 games. And what I tell people is crazy. That year, just covering the team was not very enjoyable. It was an extremely awkward, tense year because that whole season, it was just, you had the awkwardness, the lure of Kevin Durant leaving and his decision looming over the franchise. And everyone who just used the context clues and had a little common sense knew he was going to leave. But it was that awkward thing where you're not going to say, hey, I'm leaving after the season. So every practice, saying you're leaving. Kevin is extremely irritable all season. DeMarcus Cousins is on that team. His kind of future than lingo. He's irritable. You can tell that Steph and Klay and Draymond, and they've talked about this recently, and Steve Kerr for that matter, they were just exhausted. Like when you go to 5 straight finals, that's like, I think they said like 3 full seasons worth of extra basketball when you go all the way to June, 5 years in a row. You could tell the pressure and the expectations and kind of the drama was starting to weigh on them. So it made for a pretty awkward season to cover just because no one was ever in a good mood. It's like every day, and I'm like coming to practice or walking on eggshells. So, obviously what happens, they still make it to the finals because they're so talented. Then KD goes down, then Klay goes down. They lose in 6. And you just felt, Jeff, like it was the end of something. Even though it was my first year, even I'm sitting there like, man, I might be going through a couple of rebuilding years. And the I think it was the 5th game of the season. The next year, Steph Curry breaks his hand. And so it's a lot. Then, so that was the year. That was that first year. Then the second year, Steph goes down with a broken hand. The Warriors have the worst record in the NBA. Then the year after that, Steph comes back. Draymond bounces back a little. There's still no Klay, but they missed the playoffs. They lose in the play-in round to Ja Morant and the Grizzlies. And so it was a pretty disappointing season. Even though there's no Klay, when you have Steph on your team, you don't ever want to have a guy as talented as Steph and not be playing postseason basketball. So we go into this past season, no one knows what's going on. No one knows when Klay is actually going to come back. He ends up coming back in January of that season, but no expectations. I thought personally, the Warriors will probably be between like a 5 and 7 seed. They got some young guys. Steph is still at the peak of his powers. Draymond can't play any worse. And Jeff, I think they were 20-3 through the first 23 games. So about a month and a half in, I'm like, wow, this team has a chance. and they just continued to get better. And then Klay came back, and it all started to come together. And then it's funny, Steph, Klay, and Draymond, they didn't even really play prolonged minutes together until the playoffs because Steph had a little injury, Draymond had a little injury, and then Klay didn't come back till January. But, they had been playing together so long, they already had the cadence, and they just turned it on. And it was a special postseason run, but it was special because of all the craziness that had gone on the past 2 years, like I told you.
Yeah, and you see what they've done. I mean, you think about, okay, that's kind of the runs that the Chicago Bulls had when they had Michael Jordan. And
yeah,
of course, Steve Kerr was, a player on that team. And so you go to think what Steve Kerr has done. He has no coaching experience. He goes and has offers from the Knicks and then the Warriors, and he takes the Warriors job, obviously, and you're going, how can a coach with no experience do that? What has made him so special, you think, as a coach? Watching him up close, what has clicked? He obviously has amazing players, but why has he been able to hold everything together?
Steve is extremely personable and empathetic. And I think he's helped set that tone within the Warriors culture. Draymond said, feel, and it's legit, they should feel this way, that they have a voice and they can express their concerns, they can express their wants, they can bounce off ideas. It's funny, the video went viral. I tweeted it out on draft night. It's the Warriors win a championship and they have their parade on a Monday in downtown San Francisco. That Thursday is the NBA draft. You think most of the guys are away on vacation. Draymond Green is sitting in the green room at the Warriors, they call it the little Suedo war room on draft night with Steve Kerr, with Bob Myers. And this video, you can literally see is a collaborative effort. Now, that's not to say Draymond's in there saying and has as equal weight as Steve Kerr or Bob Myers into who they pick. But you can tell that Draymond feels like he has a voice and feels like what he says matters. And obviously, they're not going to do that to anyone. Like Jordan Poole's not just going to walk into a war room next year and be like, it all comes with all the success, but the inclusiveness and the openness and just like the empathy, you got to look at things from a different vantage point when you coach a Draymond Green sometimes. Let's be honest. He's not always the easiest. He's out there, and what makes him tick is what also can frustrate some people. Steve Kerr knows how to press those buttons. He knows how to coach these guys, and you know what? And he's just set a really good culture. And then Steph really helps emphasize that culture as well.
Yeah, and you talk about Steve Kerr. You were there in Dallas, when that school shooting went down, I'm going to say down the road, but in Texas. And that hit close to home for Steve Kerr. You were at that press conference. What was that like, just seeing that emotion? We saw it on Twitter. We saw it on social media. We saw it on television. To see all that emotion pour out from Steve Kerr here in a, really a heated battle of the NBA playoffs against the Mavericks. And, his focus really needs to be on basketball. But here he goes, takes a moment and speaks out against gun violence. What was that like, being there for that and seeing that raw emotion for Steve Kerr?
Jeff, it was crazy. Now, I had gotten used at that point to Steve Kerr speaking out on gun violence and politics. He's never been one to mince his words or bite his tongue. He's extremely passionate about some of these things. So I knew he was going to address it, but I didn't know it was going to be to that magnitude. And it was emotional, just as a human being. We're supposed to be objective reporters, but at the end of the day, we're human beings too. And it was an emotional moment. It reached me too. Now, everything he was saying, I had agreed with. So it's not like he said anything that changed my perspective per se, but it still was an emotional moment. And, he speaks up on a lot of different topics, but gun violence is always going to be one that he's passionate about. His dad was a professor overseas, was involved in an incident where he was shot in the back of his head, execution style. So Steve Kerr lost his dad to gun violence overseas. So that means a lot to him. And he's very specific too. It's not just broad general statements. He knows House bills and policies and who voted for this. You can tell he is very, very much so in tune with everything going on in our society and what we have to do to try to change it. So it's not just empty words, you know. You know, somebody can get in shot off the loudest rooftop, the highest rooftop, I should say, but sometimes doesn't always carry weight. You can really tell that Steve Kerr knows what he's talking about. He's educated on these topics, and he said, "Don't ask me a basketball question. Like if it was up to me, we wouldn't even play tonight." So it really resonated with him, and to go back to why he's been so successful, I think that's another reason why, because he is very personable and empathetic, and he cares about his guys.
Yeah, and you talk about one of his guys. I love the story of Klay Thompson. I guess during the NBA Finals, he's swimming in the bay in San Francisco to relax. And I think Draymond Green was kind of joking that I don't know, that's maybe his speed or whatever. But what is it like with Klay? Going all right, he's really swimming in the bay. I mean, what has it been like for him? What he's been able to do, those devastating injuries back to back. He admitted he's at a really low point, and then here he is being able to make a comeback in the NBA Finals, get to a point he never thought it'd be possible again.
Well, honestly, initially I didn't get to know Klay much when I came. So obviously the first year is just that kind of tense. And Klay is naturally an introvert, but as he's going through his rehab, especially the last year and a half, the first part of his rehab, he wasn't really close to the team. And that was after he tore that ACL. And then when he comes back and he pops that Achilles, he actually popped his Achilles while he was in Southern California, not really under the guidance of team doctors. Now, nobody said, Klay, you shouldn't have been playing. But Klay even said it. He was like, I need to be stricter with how I rehab and get back this time around. So he was at the facility every single day, just doing the same thing over and over. So the few times he would speak to us, he would talk about he had to do different things in his free time to keep his mind off of basketball or drive him crazy. So Klay's telling us what new books he's reading. He's gotten into yoga. He's done this. He started being a little more outspoken with social justice. And you kind of got to know this Klay guy, and he's a really interesting cat. And it's really what you see is what you get with him. He has this dry sense of humor, but he's like witty at the same time, and he's a lot smarter than he comes across. And I hope that doesn't sound as an insult, because he's extremely quiet, and like at one point he was just pretty direct. You're a journalist, you try to pry some things out of it, and it took a lot. So sometimes you're like, what's back there? But once you peel back the layers, you start to realize that he's an extremely intelligent guy, and it's just funny. It's like his vibes are perfect with Steph and Draymond. They all complement each other because they're all so different, but yet they all have the same goals, and they're all so close.
Yeah, I just love, his story of going through that. He's talked to so many people. He finds peace on the water. He gets a boat and he's swimming in the bay. And, he found the bay, the ocean as, his peace point. And so then that work ethic to get back to the point he needs to be at to be great again. You talk about work ethic. You see that in Steph Curry. He goes from a guy that, nobody wanted to give a Division I scholarship to, and he's one of the best players of all time. And I don't know if people look at him as like a LeBron James or a Jordan, but what do you think the perception is of Steph Curry and his legacy with, one of the greatest players of all time?
Well, I think, this is also subjective, Jeff, but I think you can confidently say after this past finals, him capturing his first finals MVP, I think he crept into the conversation of top 10 ever. Now, obviously, that top 10 is different for everyone, but I don't think anyone who is just being an objective observer can argue and say he's not even in that conversation. He's right there now. And as it comes to lead guards, you got him, you got Magic, you got Isaiah Thomas. Like, he's up there in a very short handful of players. And what makes it great with Steph, he's done it the right way. He's done it with one team. And as someone who covers him, for someone of his ilk, someone who I know is being pulled in 18 billion different directions at all times, he would almost have an excuse to sometimes be irritable, be short with us, not give us his full attention. And he does. Like every single press conference he is on, he is considerate. And that's the things I noticed. That's the thing, as a journalist, you would notice, Jeff. And I know you covered a lot of very high character, high level guys, like the guys who actually respect our job. And even on times where it might be tough to, because we're prying and, we're talking about stuff that he probably doesn't want to talk to, just had an off night. He's played his, fourth game in 6 nights. He's still there. He's still attentive. He still gives you your time. So that's what I've come to appreciate the most about Steph Curry. But obviously the basketball stuff, everyone sees it. He's going to go down as one of the greatest who's ever picked up a ball.
Yeah, these lists are always very silly because you're going, how do you compare it? And the game changes too. I mean, the game is so different today than it was even when Jordan played, let alone when Wilt played and all these other guys. And so it is hard. And when you look at really this trio and this dominant team that the Warriors have and see other guys step up that, okay, maybe their careers are over, but this whole organization that has stepped up, do you think they have enough in place to run it back again? I mean, I look at them in the West and I go, look, the Lakers are always going to be the Lakers and you got the Suns and things like that. But I mean, the Warriors, I don't see them going away anytime soon.
No, as long as Steph is playing at the level that he's been playing at the past, 3-4 years, they're always going to be relevant. Klay, you imagine Klay's going to take another step forward because he kind of got better as the year went on. He wasn't perfect, a little up and down, but he missed 913 days. Jordan Poole is only getting better. Jordan Poole is someone who reminds me of like Maxey in Philly. He's just that energizer bunny. He's going to be instant offense. They got a lot of young guys. I think they're in a perfect spot. They'll miss Gary Payton II, who they lost. GP2, honestly, looking down the roster and seeing like what he contributed in that NBA Finals, he might have been like their fourth or fifth most important player. He's just doing everything they needed. And so they'll miss him. They bring in Jermichael Green. They bring in Big Ragu from Nova, Dante DiVincenzo, the pride and joy of Delaware. So they brought in some pieces. I think they'll be right back in the mix. It's probably going to be like about between 4 and 6 teams that can realistically have a chance, and they'll be one of them.
You talk about championships coming out of San Francisco. I mean, are the 49ers, are they a team that can be in that category? I still don't really understand the quarterback situation out there. Right. Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance. And, it seems like Jimmy Garoppolo can never seem to just be the guy for a long period of time anywhere. And so you see all the talent and everything else, but how do you view the quarterback situation there? Does it seem as messy on the outside as it is on the inside?
No. So on the inside, it's not very messy. Kyle Shanahan said it from the end of last year, and he said it through 3 days of training camp so far this season. This is Trey Lance's team. So there's no mixed message. They're trying to trade Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, Jeff, if you want to say that's a mistake, now that is where people can debate. But internally, there's no mixed messaging. I think Trey Lance has all the tools to be a really good quarterback. I just know there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on him because this roster is a championship-ready roster. 3 years ago, they're in the Super Bowl. The year after that, they're so injured, everyone's hurt, so they just had a bad year. And then last year, let's be honest, they should have gone to the Super Bowl again. They're up by 10 points on the Rams in the second half. One of their safeties drops an interception that would have essentially sealed the game. They should have gone to their second Super Bowl in 3 years. It's the same gang of guys. In fact, they've gotten it a little better. They brought in Charvarius Ward to man one of those cornerback positions, which was one of their needs per se. And he's been awesome for Andy Reid in Kansas City for the past couple of years. So they got better. They just need their quarterback to perform. It's a lot to ask a second-year quarterback. No matter how good the roster is, there is going to be a on him. What if Jimmy Garoppolo is still on the roster week 1, which is very possible. Week 1, they play Chicago, a team that's not very good. What if the 49ers offense doesn't look good? And Trey is up and down, and it's like, hey, Jimmy's on the bench. Like, what do we do? I'm rooting for him, and I think he is going to be a successful quarterback, but there's pressure on him to be successful from day one because of how this roster is made up. You know it. In a snap of a finger, a Super Bowl window is closed. And the 49er, that window is wide open. So they need Trey Lance to be successful and efficient while that window is still open. And that's a lot of pressure on a first-year starter.
The other thing too, I always look at, teams sometimes get too cute, and you have Jimmy Garoppolo. I am sure he wants to play and be a starter somewhere. And so that's how all these guys are wired. They want to play, and the window is small to also play and compete and be a professional athlete in the league. And so you look at Jimmy Garoppolo, but if you're the Niners and you go, God forbid, Trey Lance gets hurt, it's a violent sport, and you get too cute and you trade Jimmy Garoppolo, all of a sudden you have a championship team, you don't have a backup quarterback, and geez, you need a solid backup quarterback that can step in and get it done.
Jeff, what's ironic? I agree with every point you just made, but it's ironic their backup quarterback actually has a Super Bowl ring, is big Nate Sudfeld.
Yeah.
Everybody knows where he won his Super Bowl. So Nate's their backup, going to be their backup once Trey leaves. They signed him for another year once Trey leaves. Once Jimmy leaves, they signed him for another year once this past offseason. So it'll be interesting. And Trey was hurt last year. Trey hurt his hand last year. So, it's going to be interesting, but it's definitely not going to lack any drama.
Yeah. And so any observations, anything you're hearing right now, potential landing spots where Jimmy Garoppolo could end up before week 1? I know it's early, and I've seen the Eagles do this where, they trade Sam Bradford, they trade this guy right before the season, and a guy gets hurt in the preseason or in training camp, and all of a sudden an opportunity opens that you didn't expect. But any potential landing spots right now that you're hearing where Jimmy Garoppolo could end up getting out of San Francisco?
Well, what makes the most sense, in my opinion, but I think if that was going to happen, it would have happened by now, is the Seahawks. But I would imagine they don't want to trade him within the division. But my next logical destination would be the Browns. They'll wait and see what happens with Deshaun Watson. And if a suspension comes down that's maybe 8 games or more, they might want a quarterback, because that's another team that they have a pretty talented roster. They want to win games. And Jimmy is probably someone who could go in there and help them win games right away.
Yeah, and one of the teams I looked at, I go, what about the Giants, right? And so the Giants, they really sold on their quarterback situation there. Could they have the money to be able to do it? They're up kind of against it, so that might be tough. But the Giants are a team, New York, you have that big stage. And so I think, oh man, maybe New York. But people I've talked to seem like New York is, not an option. But that seemed like one, okay, well, maybe, they're trying to turn the page now with a new coach.
I think the new coach wants a year with Daniel Jones. I don't see it per se with Daniel Jones, but that's what I was watching one of his pressers. That was the messaging I was getting. Like, that's my guy. And, it's kind of almost like Jalen Hurts in the sense where it's like Jalen Hurts probably has this year to prove it. They've gotten more talent around him, and they have a couple first-round picks next year. So if it doesn't work out, they can maybe flip it and move up and try to get another quarterback. But it seems like Daniel Jones is on like a prove-it year.
Yeah, and so Trey Lance, what does he need to do to take it to the next level when you have this team around you?
It's just the accuracy. He's as athletic as anyone, but you need him to be accurate with the football. A lot of balls sailed on him last year, and that's kind of every young quarterback's, problem sometimes.
Yeah. All right. Last thing for you, the Giants, Gabe Kapler. I imagine he's fitting in a little bit better in San Francisco than he did with the Phillies.
Yeah, he's down in Mission Bay. San Francisco fits in a little better there than it does in Northern Liberties. But they love him out here. He's eccentric. That's San Francisco for you. And, he won Manager of the Year. They won 107 games last year. So this year's been up and down. But
yeah, and so he's
going to be there.
What's the reason for that? What is the biggest reason for that they've had this off season and inconsistency?
They just don't have stars, Jeff. Like, now you don't have to have a star from top to bottom, but it's just talent, really. Last year, everyone played out of their mind. This year, everyone came back down to their average. And there you have it.
Yeah. That's how it goes, right? Sometimes.
Yep. Well, sure is.
Thanks for joining me. I greatly appreciate the insight, what's going on out in the Bay Area, San Francisco, covering the Warriors and the Giants and the Niners. A lot to talk about going on out there.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it, man.
Great insight there from Jason Dumas, sportscaster at KRON4 in San Francisco. If you liked what you heard, of course, you can follow Jason. He's a great follow on Twitter. Check him out at JDumasReports. Always great to see him on Twitter. Awesome insight from him there. If you like the show, click the subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. Also hit the bell button on YouTube, and we will drop you an alert the next time we drop an episode. You can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all your favorite podcast apps. Thanks for watching and listening. I'm Jeff Skversky for Inside the Huddle, presented by Sportskeeda.
I like that.